Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Paris coming to you from Baltimore. The murder of Boris Nemtsov, one of the opposition leaders in Moscow, has the Western press buzzing with whodunit. It makes great television. But who is Boris Nemtsov and what did he stand for politically in Russia? This is the topic of our next discussion with Alexander Busgalin. As you know, Alexander is a professor of political economy at Moscow State University. He's also an editor of the independent democratic left magazine Alternatives. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm very glad to talk with you every time.
I know that there's been lots of speculations and arrests going on, and there's various stories in terms of what the media is speculating in terms of who done it. But what is the more intelligent conversations going on in Moscow about this?
So it's a beautiful question, but unfortunately I'm not Sherlock Holmes, and I cannot give you the answer who killed Boris Nemtsov and who organized this crime. But as professor, I can discuss question why we have so long discussions around this person and this crime. And the question is not so simple, because when 2 years ago, even more now, a very important person, democratic left leader, Stanislav Markelov, the defender of many minorities in our country, trade union leaders, immigrants, was killed in the center of Moscow. It was a few discussions, really no discussions in big news companies like CNN or something like that. And when Boris Nemtsov was killed, it's the whole speculation for, I hope it will be finished soon, but I'm afraid that it will be for the whole month or maybe even more. Why? This is big question mark. And this is not an accident. Boris Nemtsov was made by media. He was transferred to the leader of democratic opposition. He became so-called victim of bloody KGB and so on and so far. But in reality, it's not so. I don't know who killed this person, honestly. And I can comment a little bit what kind of ideas are discussing now in the intellectual and political space in Russia. In Russia, he is associated not with democratic opposition, human rights, and so on. He is associated with bloody economic policy. I told bloody, and it means bloody. It was war in Chechnya, it was collapse in economy, decline, 50% decline of gross national product, 30% and more decline of average incomes for majority of population, 50% decline of real incomes. He was one of the leaders of this shock therapy policy, or so-called shock without therapy policy in Russia. And he is still associated with these right-wing shock therapy politicians, and he had no support from ordinary Russians and from majority of intellectuals. Only so-called glamour intelligentsia, part of bourgeoisie, part of pro-Western liberal political persons, and that's it, really minority. We had 2 years ago, even more, big demonstrations in so-called Bolotnaya Square, so-called because in Russia Bolotnaya means swamp, and this is symbolic name. But it was really big demonstration, not one demonstration, demonstrations, and Nemtsov was among leaders. But for majority, he was not their leader. We had different people, red, social democrats, center leaders, some representatives of glamour intelligentsia, some persons from the past like Nemtsov. And he was among these persons, and it was very big contradiction. And for example, Sergei Udaltsov, who is now in prison and who is in terrible conditions, he is on the border of death. I hope he is healthy in prison. But there is no big discussions because he is communist and he is a real leader of opposition among others. And he really requires big changes in economic, social, and political life in our country. And I support a big part of his requirements in economic, social sphere, in the sphere of real democracy and so on. Nemtsov, he was symbol of necessity to change economic policy in favor of another type of corporations, not to change in favor of people. He was supporter of abstract democracy, but when he was the leader, it was less democracy, or maybe the same absence of democracy as now. When he was the leader, it was a period of terrible corruption and bloody criminal atmosphere in our country. So he is not associated with opportunity chances for radical changes for 90% of Russians. Why he became now so popular? Because first of all, it's very beautiful opportunity to make from this playboy leader of democratic opposition. He is a right winger, and this is very useful for many right wing leaders in our country and especially abroad. He can be also used as symbol of terrible regime in our country. Again, I was, and I'm afraid I will be very critical about the policy of our leaders, including president, ruling party, prime minister, and majority of ministers in my country. We have really very big economic, social, and political contradictions, and these contradictions must be discussed. About different versions of this murder, of this crime. First of all, I'm afraid that behind this killing is money. It was with many leaders of so-called democratic opposition when they became victims not of political terror, not of political oppression, but victims of terrible contradictions inside their own groups. They could not divide money. They had big contradictions who will receive how big money. Nemtsov, by the way, was not businessman. He didn't have big status, and he was very rich and spending a lot of money for everything. So this is one of the versions. That behind are simply big problems with money, division of money, and contradictions around this. And it was just people who were, how to say, anybody bought these people from Caucasus to kill Nemtsov because it was necessary to solve this contradiction. This is one of the versions. Another version, which is discussed by liberal so-called Democrats, but they're not really Democrats, by the way, it's another story. I can tell you then a few words that they like Pinochet, these fighters for democracy, so-called democracy in Russia, or so-called fighters for democracy in Russia. But they think that it was organized by Putin, KGB, or something like that. I think it's not true because for Putin this is big headache, and of course for him it was not profitable at all to have this person killed. Alive, Nemtsov was nobody. Nemtsov, as victim, became a symbol of I don't know what, of something terrible, beautiful, dangerous, and so on. A lot of people are now walking in the streets and with words next me, next person who will be killed, it's me. So it's just symbolic game, and I don't think that this is Putin behind. Also, there is a strange version that friends, colleagues of Nemtsov decided to kill him in order to have this victim, this symbol, that it's a good person, a beautiful person, he is killed, and now all opposition will be united and will make something very big and important to change the situation. I don't think this is true, but this version is also popular. That's it, really. And generally speaking, for me, the question is not who is the murderer, who killed Nemtsov, or who is behind. Main question is what kind of problems we have in my country, in Russia, and what is the international context for these questions, for these problems, for these contradictions. And this question I really want to discuss, but first of all, I want to stress again and again. We have very important questions, even interconnected with violence. When I want to repeat again, Stanislav Markelov was killed. It was a few news stations who commented this question. And by the way, thank you very much, dear real news people, that you had interview with me, with other people about Stanislav Markelov. If you come again to this topic, it's really great. He was a real defender of human rights.
Okay, Alexander, thank you so much for joining us and shedding light on this particular topic. And let's continue our discussion on the economy in our next segment.
Yes, I'll be very glad to discuss with you questions of my country and international context of our events.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.